Everybody, welcome to the workstation. We did this a couple years ago at the LA Forum and a similar thing. I thought it was really nice having everybody up close and I could sort of demonstrate what goes into the performance and what all the little toys are made out of, how the drum kit's evolved even since that time. The basic changes I made, this time we went into start the Rolling Bones record. I decided that maybe I was taking it a bit safe and I wanted to change a few things around. So as Larry was setting stuff up, I said, hey, wait a minute, let's move some stuff around. So I put all the toms in different places and moved my floor tom over onto the left side. And so then if I did go to any of my, say, usual patterns, at least they would sound different. And also it gave me a lot of different rhythmic variations of having a low note under the left hand and different pitches available in different musical areas. So as we go through the songs, what I've done, I just took a live tape from the other night in Reno, and I'm going to pump it through the monitors and play along with it and kind of explain what each song is made of, both musically and technologically, and kind of what I'm having to deal with out here in terms of challenge. And one of the first ones is a song called Time Stand Still from a few years ago. And this one live I'm having to work to a click track because of the female vocalist on it, Amy Mann. And obviously she's not free to travel with us all the time, so we had her up on the screen, and in order to keep the song in sync so that when she comes up there singing, she's actually singing to the audience as well. I'm playing with the click track through that. And then apart from the acoustic stuff, I've got a kind of an array of samples, which is this little SID here is a handy little trigger that we invented and had made. It's like a miniature Simmons pad. It gives me access to an electronic trigger right in the middle of things instead of all the electronic pads are mostly difficult to get to, and sometimes if you're having to stretch too far, they can put you off your tempo and smooth. So for something to keep them like this combination, I have a little block down there, and then a sheet of metal up there, and different parts of it, castanets over there, and a weirded out snare. And then we're also, just for, of course, being a three-piece, we use a lot of keyboards and a lot of stuff on our records that's difficult to reproduce. The other guys are so busy with foot pedals and choreographing all their moves, because one of our points about sampling is that nothing can come from off stage. Anything that gets triggered is triggered by us in real time, so that we're the ones that have to get it in time, and I have to set up the tempo. Sometimes 2 minutes into a song, a sequencer will come in, the sequencer in perfect tempo, so I'm responsible really to keep the song together right up till that level, so when that sequencer comes in, the song suddenly doesn't go whang or slow right down. So that's an extra special challenge in the show too, is that when I'm not playing to a click, there still are those constraints that at a certain point in the song, suddenly this bit of perfect tempo is going to come in, and I'd better be ready for it, you know. And again, from the other guys too, whoever triggers that thing has to trigger it at exactly the right time so that it doesn't upset the tempo and the flow of the song. So there's one part in this song where I'm wired into Geddy's keyboard setup, and this little DAWs pad here, that's its function. It's the voice of the keyboards. So in places where I can help them out and I can see they're having trouble juggling it all, I say, give me that part, I can play that. And in this part we have a part, we call it Event City, and basically it's all it's a series of sound effects that were put together over the course of a day in a studio. It's not even playable live, and you'll hear it as it goes through the song. That it's another thing that I have to play it exactly in the right time, stay in time with it through a 7/4 section, and then come out of it on time, still in time with the click track of the film and all that. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on that's only driving my mind crazy, and hopefully just keeping the song together. So we'll get going with that one. the variables you have to deal with in a song that's, like I say, most of our songs are free from click or anything. We have two where other people's voices are involved, so we stay in sync with it. But through all that, other people are triggering sequencers through there, and the one I mentioned from the keyboards. If I don't nail that on time through that 7 section, then, you know, the train wreck happens. We had a couple times on this tour when it has to happen to everybody, and I know it does. Even Buddy Rich, I know it happened to. That the whole band just, the guys out on the soundboard will be making this. Here comes the train. So there are infinite opportunities. Is one of the things that does make the show such a case of stress, and before it comes up, it's like what's in your mind is all the things that can go wrong, and all the things too that are outside of your control, because there's so much of it is technology, and even mechanical things. If a snare head breaks at the wrong time, it can be, you know, an absolute nightmare. Next one I was going to go on to is one called Bravado from the new album. And it's interesting, I think, because it's basically founded upon a 4-on-the-floor bass drum rhythm, which is one thing, like, I think a lot of drummers I used to be leery of. You know, I used to think, I'm not going to sit there and play a 4-on-the-floor bass drum beat for all day. And especially in the 70s when it was sort of symptomatic of disco. It was like, it was poison even by association. But over the years I have found interesting ways to apply it, and the thing that it does do beautifully is that it roots a rhythm and allows your hands to go all kinds of different places. And this song, I spent a lot of time refining down a drum part that I think is almost architectural. It supports the song in different ways. Dynamics come in and out of it. It gave me a great opportunity to use having a floor tom on my left, as you'll see, both rhythmically and as a jumping off point for fills. And it's another one too in which sequencers come in and out in perfect time. So it's another one where I have to nail the tempo from the beginning, and parts of the sequencers go away for minutes at a time, and then suddenly they're back in. So I have to keep the song rooted through the whole space of it. And then at the end of it, there's an entire improvised section that we added to the recorded version in the rehearsal room. And we decided, after all these years, we've learned how to reproduce our records live, which for a long time was a goal, and we've taken criticism for it, but I think it was a noble thing to try to reproduce what is actually a superhuman performance in the studio. You can make it perfect, you can correct all your mistakes. If there's a little bit you don't like, you can go out and fix that little bit. You know, it is truly and literally superhuman. So we pursued for probably 16 years just that goal of trying to be as good live as we were on record. And we felt that we'd more or less achieved that to our satisfaction. So this tour, we immediately started changing our goals. And even the new songs, right from day one of rehearsals, we started changing arrangements. You're gonna have to drown this guy out. We started changing arrangements, adding improvised bits and so on. And this song's an example of that, where the whole end part evolved out of rehearsal room rehearsals, or rehearsal room jams, basically. But then we found out when we came into a venue like this, suddenly the intimacy, both personally and musically among us, was kind of lost. And in arena particularly, it was awfully difficult for us to feel truly free in an improvisational sense. So we found that all these patterns and ideas that we developed in the rehearsal room served us well as a foundation, but the chances I would take in the rehearsal room obviously are much greater than the ones I would take in front of an audience. I think that's a safe enough bet. In fact, I had an interesting conversation about that with Mickey Hart. I went to my first Grateful Dead show in Atlanta early in this tour, and he was telling me, he said the last night they'd had an absolutely great show, and that night's one he felt was pretty boring, because their show is so much predicated on improvisation, as is so much jazz, that as human nature and human behavior is, it has to range from the ridiculous to the sublime. Some nights it's going to be brilliant, like any of us, and other nights it's going to be really lousy, like any of us. So that's also the weakness of improvisation. So it's a reason why we like to keep our show well balanced in favor of organization, so it will always be at least good. And if we're having an extra special night, there is room, and there are jumping off points where each of us and collectively we can all take it further if it's happening. But I thought it was interesting for Mickey to admit that you know, some nights they had a brilliant night, and other nights he felt, you know, and admitted that it was pretty lame. Go on with Bravado. No electronics in this too, is a big relief. just an example of what can be done with balanced dynamics, and I think beginning with a song where the other two presented me the song basically with a 4-on-the-floor drum machine. And like I said, I've never found that totally satisfying, but it does represent a good jumping off point. And I found things like the skip drum beat in the bass drum beat in the second verse, and ways to bring in the toms in and out for dynamic's sake, and also to give me more rhythmic variation. And also, from a drummer's point of view, if you're going to play the song possibly for years and years, I think that the drum part becomes important to me because it has to be challenging enough and enjoyable enough to play every night on, on an ongoing basis. So it possibly is a different set of values for a studio musician where the only question is serving the song. And I think that's valid too within its context. But if you're a member of a band that's a touring band and this is your drum part and essentially your song that you're going to have to reproduce, then I think your agenda becomes that plus. You know, you want to serve the song certainly. And I think in this case I was very careful to stay out of the way of vocals or lead parts or anything else where I might, sort of tread on someone else's toes, but at the same time there was no reason not to make it as interesting as possible for me, as dynamic as possible, just as a pure drum part, and in the end come up with something that is a pleasure to play every night. What do we got next, Big Money? All the Bones, okay. Here's another one that's live, is played also to the click for the same reason. We have another voice comes up on the screen up there, so I have to stay in sync with the film throughout. I dug myself some interesting holes in the drum part of this. Again, when the guys were working on the musical part, they asked me for some rhythmic input. So I programmed the drum machine, because normally in our working relationship, I'm off working on lyrics and they're working on music, so I can't be there, fortunately in a way, because for a drummer I think it's kind of soul destroying to have to sit there and do the hack work while the other guys are working on a musical part. You're the drum machine, essentially. So I'm kind of grateful to drum machines for taking that away. But in this case, I had programmed a drum part for them, and then they wrote the song around this part, which appears in the bridge. And I programmed it as a drum machine part, not thinking about having to play it. So when it came to me playing the song physically, of course, I treated that part a little different. And they said, well, that doesn't sound like the part you put. Well, I can't play that part. It's a drum machine part. A machine can play it. So those kind of challenges, I think for a lot of us, and certainly for me, all I need is a challenge like that. I will play it. So I went off to the rehearsal room and learned how to play it, and it appears in the bridge sections of this song. It's got a very rapid, syncopated sort of bass drum part that was easy for the machine, but considerably more difficult for me. It's stuff like that you hear through the song. So again, it was just one of those places where your imagination can sometimes give your body a challenge, or a machine can certainly return that challenge to you. This was an example of that. Electronically in this, through the sections, it's kind of a pseudo-rap part. We call it the chat. And I use electronic drums just for the kind of veracity, I guess, of it. And it's your typical mechanical drums, only of course I'm playing them physically, and they appear in the middle of a very organic rock song. And this is another case where I'm tapped into the keyboards, filling in a part that was difficult for the other two guys to get to. So I have to get, again, that was another thing I had to choreograph in the middle of all my playing to get over to that. And then I have another keyboard part here, which again was choreographed in, and I thought, okay, I can get to that, guys. You got enough to do. I'll take over that. So I took on the keyboard part there. I think, yeah, that's all the electronic stuff. So here it is, Roll the Bones.
My place loses
trust of technology. Like I say, by the time those two are gone, it's like, yes, okay, from now on, I run the show, and not at the mercy of you know, a mechanical feed from elsewhere. The next one is again an older song. It's called The Big Money, but it makes some interesting use of pads available all around me, and one with a couple little sequencers coming in, but for the most part, again, I'm steering the show. Yeah, I guess that's about all to say on that one. I'll just do it. Oh, here's an interesting choreographic move too, is snare comes on and off. Snare strands have to come on and off throughout the song, so there are places where I've choreographed a left-hand swing, and one reason why it's so hard for me to switch from this old Slingerland, because it has the handiest, smoothest snare action, where I can catch it on the way by and switch it on and off, and not have to, guys, I need an extra bar in this song so I can turn the snare on or off. You know, I find that with a lot of strainers, so it's one reason that's kept me with this, apart from loving its power and sensitivity. It's one thing that the snare strainer, as old as it is, and it's one thing that drives Larry nuts, is trying to find parts for a thing that hasn't been made for you know, 10 years or so. And the snare drum I bought secondhand for $60 in about 1976 or something. So keeping parts for it is difficult, but it's one of those challenges. Hang on, wait a second. Set up for a second. Just I'll run through what we have here. This is a bongo sample from my my first time ever playing bongos on records. So a lot of the samples I have are actually stuff of my own, but wouldn't fit in drum kit or wouldn't be practical to get to. This is an example of that. A bongo there, and down there is from the old days of the Simmons claptrap, an analog synthesizer where you can just create white noise basically, and I use it like a studio engineer would use an effect behind the snare, usually hitting both at once, so it's just like an echo in here. Working with the producer Peter Collins, who couldn't stand the sound of Simmons drums, so we looked for ways to get the tone. This started as a Simmons drum, and then I vocalized the actual sound I wanted. I said, well, I'm looking for sound that's like doo, doo. So I said, okay, we'll record that. And they recorded it, sampled it, and combined it with the tom sound. So it's an actual case of my voice in there. And then we wanted a percussive effect that was jingling coins. So English coins being so huge, just took a handful of coins, sampled them, and used them. Anything else over there? No, there's no keyboards in that. So okay, that's the basic round of electronics that are coming into it. Ready now? another example too of a 4 on the floor not being a limitation, but rather being a foundation, where I'm able to keep that going and consequently get from there over to here without losing the tempo, without losing the flow of things. Okay, I guess we might as well come around. Prepare to come about. Don't try this at home. So essentially, I mentioned before that I was a little bit reluctant with electronics, and I've talked about it in print and stuff before, so I won't go over it too much again, just saying that I didn't go with electronics till I could no longer resist it, basically. When it became possible for me to have every percussion instrument I own, and even ones I've never even seen before as samples, I couldn't say no any longer. So I started adding them, but at the same time I wasn't willing to sacrifice even one acoustic drum, because that's the fundamental thing after all. These other things make nice accessories, and they make it possible to have a drum set I can reach that includes marimba, and that includes gongs, and that includes African drums, includes tablas, and every other thing I could possibly want, really, but I can still get at it. So for that reason, I just said, okay, fine, I'll do it. And as we came into sampling, now we're using the Akai samplers, and the Roland samplers off stage are the ones that I'm triggering keyboard-wise. What I'm going to run through now is basically the opening of my drum solo, which began as a marimba piece. Usually when we're in the studio writing and rehearsing, I like to dabble in something else, and marimba makes a great escape from both lyric writing and for drumming. So a lot of times I'll get a small synthesizer and just create a sequence of chord patterns that I like or that I find challenging or whatever, and I'll make this sequence, and then I'll have my marimba in there, or the Cat MIDI marimba, and just when I get too much brain fever from staring at the computer screen or from working on drum parts, I go and play along with that. So this came out of a piece called Momo's Dance Party that was all sequenced drums and sequenced keyboards and everything, and then the marimba part was played over it live. And in this case I decided I still am not willing to take the step into using a sequencer live, even in a drum solo context. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to make the best real-time situation, combining all these that I can. So it's a combination of basically Latin and African drums over here. My timbali had to get jettisoned to put this floor tom here, so it lives on in sound. And then over here we have a combination of congas and bongos, which actually survived from a song of ours called Scars, where I made up a whole drum part made of samples. And this one is one of those ones I mentioned. It's called a djembe. I have no idea what it looks like, but I love the sound. And this one is the deep kind of root of the thing in an African rhythm, what would be the one, basically. And then combined with acoustic, sometimes acoustic snare, bass drum, hi-hat, and then I also have that's this very snare sampled out of a song of ours called Grand Designs. It was done for the purposes of the song Scars, because I had my hands full basically playing all the conga and bongo parts and so on. So when I wanted to bring the snare in to kick the backbeat in for extra emphasis, I put it down there for that, and I found it quite useful in this context, that when I get over onto the marimba, it gives me a snare and bass drum, basically a rhythmic continuity allowing it. There's another place too where the sound man's helping me out, because in the beginning of it I wanted something that was quite atmospheric, that would allow me to build a drum solo basically from an arrhythmic sense. So I would just start with sounds and moods and set up the tribal sort of basic mood. And in a way I construct a drum solo partly as an autobiography of all the things that have interested me in drumming over the years, and also partly in an unpretentious way, but as a history too of drumming as it has evolved and as I've learned it. So I thought I wanted to start with this very tribal thing and have it be arrhythmic at first, and then gradually bring rhythm into it, and then gradually bring melody into it. And then as the drum solo evolved throughout, it went into all the evolutions of marching drumming and a taste of jazz drumming here and there, and different ideas of rock drumming and Caribbean drumming, reggae drumming, and so on. So I'm going to play the intro for you, and then we'll spin around and I'll get on to the outro and leave out all the flash stuff in the middle. But basically the sound man is covering me here, where I've got just I begin with just that, and then through the house, in an arena for instance, we would have a quad system, so he sends that around the house when she sits around the house. So the sound man's covering for me there, and I can build up my little fills, as I'll demonstrate in a second, and then gradually evolve it into a complete rhythm, and then develop that rhythm and then bring melody into it. So I'm beginning basically, as I get introduced, I'm starting just with the chimes here, and then boom, 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 boom.